Westernspring Television. Ours it is.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to Spring Global on Westernspring Television. Now the headlines. NNPC confirms hike in petrol pump price nationwide. Outside Nigeria, Zimbabwe to hold nationwide elections on the 23rd of August. United Arab Emirates withdraws from United States-led maritime coalition following security. The Nigerian National Petroleum Company, NNPC Limited, has confirmed the hike in pump price of premium model spirit, also known as petrol. The price adjustment by the NNPC is coming some 48 hours after President Bola Tinubu announced an end to the subsidy era during his inaugural speech at the Eagle Square on May 29, 2023. Fuel queues have since resurfaced across the country since the presidential pronouncement as Nigerians queue for the premium product, which is now sold from 300 naira per litre to as high as 600 naira per litre. NNPC spokesman Garba Mohammed in a statement today said the price of the essential commodity has been adjusted at its retail outlets nationwide, but it did not mention a specific amount. It said the price per litre of petrol will continue to fluctuate to reflect market dynamics. The Senate has passed Equality Opportunities Bill seeks to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women and people living with disabilities. According to the sponsor of the bill, Biodun Olujimi, if signed into law, the proposed legislation will encourage women to aspire and reach their full potentials. The bill, when enacted, will also assist in dislodging the barriers to women's equal access to all forms of financial credit, technical assistance, family benefit, and other aspects of cultural life. In December 2021, Senator Olujimi was asked to withdraw the proposed legislation after some of her colleagues raised arguments that the bill is against their socio-cultural and religious beliefs. Amongst other demands, the women want specific seats in the National Assembly, indigenship of their husband's state after 5 years of being together. Mnangagwa's ZANU-PF party, which has been in power since independence in 1980, will face off against the Citizens Coalition for Change, CCC, led by Nelson Chamisa, a 45-year-old lawyer and pastor. It will be Mnangagwa's opponent for a second time. Chamisa on Tuesday called on Mnangagwa to set a date for the poll after prolonged uncertainty and flip-flops. The CCC also decried the electoral roll, saying many voters, including some senior politicians, had had their names removed or misplaced on the register. President Faustin Archange Touadera has set July 30th as the date for a proposed referendum on a new constitution for the Central African Republic that would allow him to seek a new term in 2025. Touadera was elected in 2016 and was returned for a second term in 2020, despite widespread accusations of electoral flaws and an ongoing military rapid support forces began in Saudi Arabian port city of Jeddah in early May and had produced a declaration of commitments to protecting civilians and 2 short-term ceasefire deals that have been repeatedly violated. The army and the RSF had agreed to extend a week-long ceasefire deal by 5 days just before it was due to expire late on Monday. Until late Tuesday, intense clashes were reported in South Sudan's capital Khartoum, with residents reporting intensive fighting in all 3 of the adjoining cities that make up Sudan's greater capital. And General Command, PFLPGC, has blamed Israel for the killing of 5 of its members in a blast in eastern Lebanon near the Syrian border. A PFLPGC official, Anwar Raja, said an Israeli strike today hit positions in Lebanese town of Kusaya. He said 10 people were wounded, of which 2 are in critical condition. There were conflicting moved Another PFLP GC official, Lebanon-based Abu Wail Issam, said in the fight against the Israeli enemy. The group has positions along the Lebanon-Syrian border as well as military presence in both countries, and it has carried out attacks against Israel in the past. In Asia, China has blamed the U.S. provocation for an incident in which a Chinese plane crossed in front of an American surveillance aircraft over the South China Sea. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning said today that the United States' long-term and frequent sending of ships and planes to conduct close surveillance on China seriously harms China's national sovereignty and security. Mao noted that the provocative, dangerous activity is the cause of the security issues on the seas, maintaining that China will continue to take all necessary steps to resolutely protect its own sovereignty and security. The U.S. military said on Tuesday that a Chinese fighter pilot. North Korea has said an accident happened as it planned to send its first space satellite, causing it to crash into the sea. Pyongyang announced earlier it plans to launch a satellite by 11th of June to monitor U.S. military activities, but it now says it will attempt a second launch as soon as possible. The launch sparked a false alarm in the South Korean capital Seoul, while in Japan, a warning was issued to residents of Okinawa in the south. There was chaos and confusion in Seoul as people awoke to the sound of an air raid siren and an emergency message telling them to prepare for an evacuation, only to be told 20 minutes later it had been sent in error. Also in Asia, a leading rights group has urged Pakistan not to try civilians in military courts, reminding the government that the practice violates the country's obligations under international law. Pakistan plans to try in army courts dozens of its citizens accused of attacking military installations during protest this month after the dramatic arrest of former Prime Minister Imran Khan. In a statement issued today, Human Rights Watch HRW said international human rights standards provide no basis for Pakistani authorities to try the cases in military courts, especially as the civilian courts are functioning. HRW's Associate Asia Director Patricia Guzman said the Pakistani government has a responsibility to prosecute those committing violence, but only in independent and impartial civilian courts. The HRW released its statement shortly after Interior Minister Said Khan could also face trial in a military court for masterminding the attacks on the army during the deadly protest on May 9th and 10th, which included arson at the residence of a top military commander in Lahore. You're watching Spring Global on Westernspring Television. I'll be right back after this break.
James Ajibolaige was a lawyer who obtained his first degree in classics from Nigeria's premier University of Ibadan. Born September 13, 1930, the orator and the polyglot spoke impeccable English, French, Igbo, Hausa, and Yoruba languages. His fine diction placed him among classical orators and public speakers like Cicero, the Roman orator. This attribute earned him the prefix Cicero of Esauke. He authored Kaduna Boy, an autobiography, Detainage Diary, Constitution, and The People, among 6 other books. Bolaige was a colorful politician, elected governor of Oyo State in 1979 and appointed a federal minister in 1999. He was a pioneer founder of Afenifere, the Yoruba social, cultural, and political group. He invested his political sagacity to propel the group to the height of political leadership and decision-making in the southwest of Nigeria. Bolaige was assassinated on the 23rd December 2001. His murderers are yet to be apprehended till today. Westernspring Television identifies Bolaige as a watershed character in history.
You're welcome back. The United Arab Emirates has withdrawn from a United States-led maritime coalition after an extensive evaluation of its security needs. The country's foreign ministry said this in a statement today. The UAE also said it was committed to dialogue and diplomatic engagement to advance regional security and stability, as well as ensuring navigation safety near its shores in accordance with international law. The decision marks a pivotal moment in the region's geopolitical landscape, altering the dynamics of international cooperation and maritime security. 34-nation task force headquartered at the U.S. Naval Base in Bahrain was formed to counter terrorism and piracy in the Red Sea and Gulf areas. And elsewhere, Nepal's Prime Minister Pushpa Dahal will seek a long-term deal to export hydroelectric power and the opening of new air routes through India during his visit. The four-day visit starting today is Dahal's first foreign trip since he was elected Prime Minister again in December. He has visited India twice, referring two previous tenures as Prime Minister dating back to 2008. The visit is a tradition of new Nepalese leaders making New Delhi their first foreign port of call after resuming office, underlining the strong ties between the South Asian neighbors. Foreign Minister Narayan Saud said Nepal was seeking long-term deals of energy, including more Indian investment in hydroelectric projects and the construction of transmission lines between the two countries. United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Rafael Grossi has urged Ukraine and Russia to adhere to concrete principles to prevent nuclear catastrophe at the Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. Grossi, speaking to the United Nations Security Council, said the nuclear safety and security situation at the Zaporizhzhia power plant continues to be extremely fragile and dangerous. They urged both sides to respect 5 principles to safeguard the power plant, suggesting it had not secured their agreement in protecting the facility. The International Atomic Energy Agency chief urged in particular that the plant should not be used as a base for heavy weapons such as multiple rocket launchers, artillery systems and munitions and tanks, or for military personnel that could be used for an attack from the plant.
We are fortunate that a nuclear accident has not yet happened. As I said at the IAEA Board of Governors last March, we are rolling a dice. And if this continues, then one day our luck will run out. So we must all do everything in our power to minimize the chance that it does. As the Council knows, since returning from my first of 2 missions to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant last September, I have been urging all parties to protect the nuclear safety and security of the plant. This has involved numerous meetings, intensive consultations and exchanges, including at the highest levels in Ukraine and the Russian Federation.
In other news, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen today delivered a speech to Parliament, partly written using artificial intelligence tool ChatGPT to highlight the revolutionary aspect and risk of AI. The head of the Danish government is giving a traditional speech as Parliament gets ready to close for the summer. ChatGPT burst into the spotlight late last year, demonstrating an ability to generate essays, poems, and conversations from the briefest of prompts. The program's wild success sparked a gold rush with billions of dollars of investment into the field. Common worries include the possibility that chatbots could flood the web with disinformation, that biased algorithms will churn out racist material, or that AI-powered automation could lay waste to entire industries. The subject is on the agenda of a high-level meeting on trade between the United States and the European Union today in Luleå, Sweden. A private space flight carrying a team of 2 Saudi and 2 American astronauts, including the first Arab woman sent into orbit, has splashed down safely in the Gulf of Mexico after a research mission on board the International Space Station. The SpaceX Crew Dragon capsule carrying the team parachuted into the Gulf of Mexico off the coast of Panama City, Florida, on Tuesday night after a 12-hour re-entry flight after 10 days in orbit. The splashdown was carried live by a joint webcast presented by SpaceX and the company behind the mission, Axiom Space. The return to Earth concluded the second space station mission organized, equipped, and trained entirely at private expense by Axiom, a 7-year-old Houston-based venture. The Axiom 2 crew was led by retired NASA astronaut Peggy Whitson, who holds the U.S. record for most time spent in orbit, with 665 days in space over 3 long-duration missions to the ISS, including 10 spacewalks. In the meantime, NATO peacekeeping troops in Kosovo have placed metal fences and barbed wire barriers in the northern town following clashes that have seen dozens of international soldiers and protesters injured. The barriers were erected after hundreds of ethnic Serbs started gathering in front of the city hall in Zvecan. On Monday, with about 4,000 soldiers in the country, NATO sent 700 additional troops to northern Kosovo to help curb the violent protest. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg told reporters in Oslo, Norway, that 700 more troops have been deployed from the Operational Reserve Force for Western Balkans to put an additional battalion of reserve forces on high alertness. Violence initially broke out in the north of the country over the weekend after ethnic Albanian mayors were installed in Serbian-dominated areas in a vote overwhelmingly boycotted by Serbs. Some in the country have since made repeated efforts to take over the offices in Zvecan, where the mayors took up their post.
KFOR, the NATO forces, will take all necessary actions to maintain a safe and secure environment for all citizens in Kosovo. And we will continue to act impartially in line with our United Nations mandate. We have decided to deploy 700 more troops from the Operational Reserve Force for Western Balkans and to put an additional battalion of reserve forces on higher readiness so they can also be deployed if needed. These are prudent steps to ensure that KFOR has the forces and capabilities it needs to fulfill its mandate.
Moving on, an American woman who accused U.S. President Joe Biden of sexually assaulting her has flown to Moscow and is seeking Russian citizenship. Speaking to journalist, 59-year-old Tara Reid said she felt safe in the country and wanted to stay. Reid alleged President Biden assaulted her while she was working in his congressional office in 1993. However, President Biden strongly denied her allegations and said it never happened. Reid worked as an assistant to President Biden when he was a senator for Delaware. She accused him of forcing her against a wall and putting his hands under her shirt and skirt.
The attacks will continue. I only know that when I got off the plane in Moscow for the first time in a very long time, I felt safe and I felt heard and I felt respected. And that has not happened in my own country. I did talk to U.S. Congressman Matt Gaetz. I have not concealed anything. I told him I was in Moscow, Russia, and I told him why. And he said something very stunning. I am considered a whistleblower, as you know, in the United States. One of the cases I will be testifying is about how the DOJ and the FBI has weaponized by the Biden administration against its own citizens.
One of Africa's most celebrated authors and playwrights, Ghanaian Ama Aidoo, has died at the age of 81. As a renowned feminist, she depicted and celebrated the condition of African women in works such as The Dilemma of a Ghost, A Sister Killjoy, and Changes. She opposed what she described as a Western perception that the African female is a downtrodden wretch. She also served as education minister in the early 1980s, but resigned when she could not make education free. In a statement, her family revealed that the writer has passed away after a short illness, requesting privacy to allow them to grieve. Ata Aidu, who was a university professor, won many literary awards and for her novels, plays and poems, including the 1992 Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Changes, a love story about a statistician who divorces her first husband and enters into a polygamist marriage. There are some business stories now. Group Chief Executive Officer of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company, NNPC Limited, Mele Kyari, says the federal government still owes the firm the sum of 2.8 trillion naira spent on petrol subsidy. Addressing journalists after a meeting with President Bola Tinubu in Abuja on Tuesday, Kyari said the subsidy payment was no longer sustainable as it hinders the company from funding its core businesses. He also said the NNPC made a petrol subsidy payment from its cash flow, noting that the government has been unable to pay back the 2.8 trillion naira spent so far.
Elimination of this subsidy.
The United States House of Representatives is due to vote today on a bill to lift the government's $31.4 trillion debt ceiling. Republicans control the House by a narrow 222 to 213 majority, but a bipartisan deal will need support from both Speaker Kevin McCarthy's Republicans and President Joe Biden's Democrats to pass, as members of both parties object to significant parts of the bill. In closed meeting with the White House officials this morning, House Minority Leader Kim Jeffries strongly urged the divided Democratic caucus to back the debt ceiling bill.
After weeks of talks and warnings of potential economic disaster, the White House and congressional leaders in the United States have reached a deal to increase the debt ceiling, one that lawmakers now must turn into law before the U.S. defaults on its obligations. Legislation brokered by President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to lift the $31.4 trillion U.S. debt ceiling and achieve new federal spending cuts passed an important hurdle late on Tuesday, advancing to the full House of Representatives for debate and an expected vote on passage on Wednesday.
Look, we're not negotiating the debt ceiling. Here's the deal. They said they passed the debt ceiling, and they said they'd only do it on condition that it have all these cuts in it. I said, I'm not going to do that. You pass the debt ceiling, period. I'll negotiate with you on the cuts. What you say, what's going to happen, what the budget's going to look like. That's what we are negotiating in order to get to them deciding that they're going to go along with a new debt ceiling, meaning that it's not attached. It's something totally different attached than was attached before. So if you want to try to make it look like I made some compromise on the debt ceiling, and I didn't. I made a compromise on the budget.
The House Rules Committee voted 7-6 to approve the rules allowing debate by the full chamber. Two committee Republicans, Representatives Chip Roy and Ralph Norman, bucked their leadership by opposing the bill.
My colleagues, be very clear. Not one Republican should vote for this deal. It is a bad deal. No one sent us here to borrow an additional $4 trillion to get absolutely nothing in return. But at best, if I'm being really generous, a spending freeze for a couple of years. That's it. That's about what you get. And frankly, you're going to make things worse. And my Democratic colleagues know it. That's why they're supporting it. That's why they're going around gleeful. Look, there's a reason our Democrat colleagues support this. There's a reason that Mitt Romney supports this. There's a reason that Bill Kristol supports this. It's all the same stuff. There's a reason that our conservative allies are opposing it roundly. The Club for Growth, scoring against it. The Heritage Foundation, scoring against it. Freedom Works, scoring against it. Ron DeSantis, publicly opposed. President Trump said he thought we should default rather than pursue this kind of lunacy. At the end of the day, the only person that would default in this town is Joe Biden, unless Republicans default on the American dream by voting for this bad bill. That is why this group will oppose it. We will continue to fight it today, tomorrow, and no matter what happens, there's going to be a reckoning about what just occurred unless we stop this bill by tomorrow.
And now all of a sudden, at the last minute, it's an insult to get a 100-page bill and be asked to decide on it on the spot. I won't buy a microwave unless I get it in writing.
The crisis and its resolution have been months in the making. They trace back to the November 2022 midterm elections, which saw Republicans win a narrow majority in the U.S. House of Representatives, depriving President Joe Biden's Democratic Party of the ability to pass legislation on its own. House passage would send the bill to the Senate. The measure needs congressional approval before June 5, when the Treasury Department could run out of funds to pay its debts for the first time in U.S. history. If the Treasury Department cannot cover all its payments, or if it was forced to prioritize payments, that could trigger economic chaos in the U.S. and global economies. Biden and McCarthy have predicted they will get enough votes to pass the 99-page bill into law before the June 5 deadline. Nevertheless, some of the House's most conservative Republicans who sought far deeper spending reductions were not persuaded, and it was unclear how many Democrats McCarthy will need to win Wednesday's anticipated vote on passage. All four Democrats on the Rules Committee voted against the bill, as they typically do on Republican-backed legislation. It was unclear whether that might influence other Democrats to do the same on Wednesday, even as Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries said his party would provide the support McCarthy needs. Temi Takwe Ajijalal, Westernspring Television News.
Before we end Spring Global, here is a recap of our top stories. The Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, NNPCL, has confirmed the hike in the pump price of premium motor spirit, also known as petrol. And outside Nigeria, Zimbabwe will hold nationwide elections on the 23rd of August, ending months of speculations over the date. The United Arab Emirates has withdrawn from a United States-led maritime coalition after an extensive evaluation of its security needs. You can follow us on all of our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Westernspring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Westernspring Television. My name is Femi Olani. Good evening.